What's going on? Welcome back, everybody. Justin here as always. Thanks for stopping by and hanging out with me today to talk about Nightbreed, and more specifically this brand new release from Scream Factory of Nightbreed. We're going to get into all the bonus features and the Scream Factory aspect of this after I talk about the movie a little bit. Some of you have been following the channel. You know I've had a little bit of a tumultuous, me and Scream Factory have had a complicated relationship, but with this release, there's a potential road to redemption for me and Scream Factory sort of mending our fences. But we'll get into this release here in a minute. Let's go ahead and talk about the movie itself, written and directed by Clive Barker. I didn't see this movie until just a few years ago, and after seeing it, it really didn't make a huge mark on me. I felt very underwhelmed. To me, the theatrical cut just didn't make a lot of sense. I didn't really understand who I was supposed to sympathize with. Was I supposed to sympathize with the monsters? Was I supposed to buy into the whole slasher aspect of the Decker Cronenberg character? I didn't find Craig Sheffer to be a fantastic leading man, and even in the director's cut, I still have some thoughts on Craig Sheffer as an actor, but after seeing the director's cut, which is the true vision of Clive Barker, it feels like a completely different movie, and I have a whole new view of this movie, and I actually really ended up enjoying this movie for what it was. It still seems a little muddled and probably worked better on the page, but overall, the director's cut is a far more enjoyable experience and actually gives a story arc and actually gives background and reasons and motivations for a lot of these characters. It's not a forced slasher movie like what the studio cut it down to be. But the movie centers around just a handful of characters. You have our main character, Boone, who is plagued with these weird dreams, these very, very vivid dreams of this otherworldly place and all of these monsters. He's haunted by these nightmares. Boone's girlfriend, who seems to be the most tolerant and patient girlfriend of all time, dealing with Boone's weird quirks and all of his nightmares and visions and disturbances. The beginning of the movie also sets up the fact that we have an active serial killer going around and murdering tons and tons of people, and somebody seemingly hell-bent on pointing the police in the direction of Boone to sort of frame Boone for these murders that are happening, pushing the police to sort of look at him as a suspect. And if this whole serial killer plot isn't enough, then you bring in the monsters and all of the lore of Midian, which builds up the chunk of this director's cut. A chain of events happens, which I won't completely spoil. I want to leave some of this up to mystery if you have not seen it yet. Boone becomes one of these Nightbreeds that he's been having these visions of, and he learns of who Midian is and who these monsters are and who they really are. The monsters really aren't the villains that you'd think they are when watching a movie like this, and especially watching the trailer. You think there's a killer slasher going on and also these weird monsters that are probably part of the evil going on, but they're not. The monsters are kind of the good guys. I kind of related these monsters in Midian to people who live in the shadows, who feel misunderstood, who kind of feel like outcasts in the world. That's what the monsters of Midian represent. But fast forward, everything comes to a head in the third act with a big sort of confrontation, big action sequence that takes place in Midian, the home of the monsters. Now, like I said, when I watched the initial theatrical cut, it seemed so jumbled and so truncated. It just, you felt the edits, you felt the studio influence of the movie. The director's cut, all of that is expanded. There's over 40 minutes of new footage. Now, there's only 20 minutes of additional runtime, being that they removed some of those original scenes from the theatrical cut and replaced them with other stuff, so this makes a much more coherent movie. Although, like I said, this movie really does feel like probably worked better in the pages of a book because there's so much lore and all this crazy storytelling and inner monologue. I imagine it was very difficult to translate this much story, this much lore into a movie, but the director's cut far more represents Clive Barker's original vision. Even watching the director's cut, this movie still does have its problems. I feel like certain aspects of the movie could have been completely cut out. Like, to me, if you just had Boone dealing and struggling with all of these visions and trying to find out what Midian is, I don't even think you needed that whole slasher aspect. To me, I feel like you could have cut all of the David Cronenberg, all of the Decker stuff, although like the mask looks very, very cool, I don't think it was needed to tell the story. You could have just focused on Boone, his girlfriend, his visions, him trying to find Midian, stumbling upon it. I feel like the whole story could have been told without that police procedural. You could have just focused on Boone and the monsters and find a better way for him to sort of find out about the world of Midian, and the movie would have been shorter. It would have been made a little bit more sense. A different conflict that could have, you know, gave some kind of a battle or something in the third act other than the procedural, because it really adds up to nothing at the end, in my personal opinion. But it is far better than the director's cut. That's for sure. This movie feels very cozy. I found myself really sympathizing with a lot of the monsters there once you realize that they're not the bad guys. I still feel like Midian should have been not just like a stone's throw away from like residential areas in a graveyard. To me, it should have been in a separate realm, like in some kind of portal, because I just can't, in my mind, I just can't justify how this whole world of Midian and all of these monsters have been running around for decades, maybe even hundreds of years, and they haven't been discovered. It's kind of like Michael roaming the streets in Halloween Ends for however long, 2 years, and nobody sees Michael running around the sewer. It's kind of like that. We would have noticed these people in Midian, these monsters, so it's still a little wonky to me. And Craig Sheffer's performance, I feel like he's not the best lead, because to me, I just don't believe a lot of his heavy dramatic parts in this movie. I just didn't connect with him as a lead. I like the lead actress, she's great, and I like all of the monsters and makeup effects. That's where this movie really shines. And that's kind of where I want to get into talking about this release, because this is, I gotta give Scream Factory credit, this is an incredible release. I watched every special feature in this set right here, and I was just glued to my screen with how informative and how thorough and how much access we have behind the scenes filming this movie way back in whatever it was, 1990. The documentary Tribes of the Moon, The Making of Nightbreed, is a 72 minutes, pretty much a feature-length documentary on the entire production. The makeup, the auditions, everything that went into making this movie. It's fascinating to watch, and all of this amazing behind the scenes footage that was shot on film that's been cleaned up, it just looks absolutely incredible. It really feels like you are on the set, and we're talking to the directors and the editors and the makeup guys. There's an introduction by Clive Barker and his producer, and they tell you all about how they discovered and found all of these long forgotten film elements to be restored, restoring them, and then battling the studios. Then you have Making Monsters, a look at the special makeup effects. So you have an interview with the lead guy from Image Animation, the effects studio behind this, breaking down every nuance of all of the makeup stuff. We even have these amazing makeup tests where characters are just doing movement tests at different frames per second, and it just looks amazing. It looks like it was filmed yesterday. You also have cutting compromise. So there was a huge dispute and tons of bad blood with Clive Barker and the producers of this movie at Fox, who completely grabbed his movie and cut it away from him. And they actually have an interview called Cutting Compromise, an interview with the editor of this movie, how he sort of tries to defend his case against his cut of the movie. You know, he was kind of put in a weird position where he was hired by the studio to come in here and edit this movie. So it's really by no fault of his own. He was just taking a job, you know, and by nature of that, Clive Barker being the artist, this editor brought in by the big bad studio to chop his movie up. He was just doing his job, and Clive Barker was trying to make the best movie that he could. And, you know, to him, Clive Barker, it seemed like this editor was just coming here and ripping his heart out. So it really was interesting to see an interview with the editor kind of pleading his case and being like, hey, this was my job. This is what I was hired to do. Make this movie move faster, make it move a little quicker. Try to heighten these aspects of the movie and bring down these aspects of the movie. He was just doing his job, but you know, the studio fucked up the movie because the director's cut is so much a better movie. You also have matte painting tests where they show all of the actors just doing all these random test shots of these beautiful matte paintings that they have. So it's really cool to see this super, super raw footage. I love seeing that type of stuff. Then we have a whole aspect of the movie that was kind of lost due to budget cuts, and that was all the stop motion animation stuff. So we get to see these cut scenes of the stop motion sequences that they just didn't have time to film, but it was cool to see what could have been with all of these really cool stop motion animation, most taking place in Midian with these creatures and things like that. I love stop motion, but this was just on the tail end of of stop motion where they really just couldn't justify spending tens of thousands of dollars, you know, per second of this stop motion animation. But it does look cool, and you get to see the footage that they did shoot, which was awesome. Then you have another featurette, a look at the second unit shoot, which is an interview with the second unit director called Fire, Fights, and Stunts. That's really cool too, kind of going into all the second unit stuff, more of the action-y stuff. Then you have Clive Barker's character sketches, a massive amount of stills in the still gallery, on-set photos. I am a big still gallery. I'm one of those nerds that will sit there and watch a still gallery to see all those behind-the-scenes shots and the makeup tests and all of the like cast photos. I eat that shit up. This feels like the old school Scream Factory release to me. It made me feel, watching all the special features and all of this stuff on here, it made me feel like, you know, Scream Factory used to be kind of the GOAT at these. You know, they were the ones plucking these movies out of obscurity and making new features before their whole library just consisted of rehashed, ported over movies and 4K rescans and all of this stuff. The director's cut is not in 4K, it's a Blu-ray. I wish they would have kind of compiled that 4K and Blu-ray footage for a 4K of the director's cut. I wish we could have had that, but the 4K, I gotta say, the scan on this looks incredible. Some scenes look better than others because some of the elements were kind of fucked up. The daytime scenes and the well-lit scenes look incredible. You sacrifice some of the resolution in the lower light scenes, but across the board, this Blu-ray looked absolutely stunning. The makeup effects really shine here. Sometimes that can kind of show the warts and show the flaws of a lot of practical effects. But here they look fantastic. I just couldn't believe how good this looked. The skin tones, the detail in the skin. This has a lot less grain than some of these other remasters. Like if you watch a lot of Vinegar Syndrome, I feel like they sort of preserve a lot of that grain. This just looks crystal clear without having a lot of digital restoration or that smoothed over look. It just looked absolutely stunning. This is a beautiful release from Scream Factory. If you have not seen this movie, highly recommend picking this up. And I recommend watching the director's cut first and then watching the theatrical cut just to see how much of it doesn't make sense with all of the added scenes. But beautiful release of Nightbreed from Scream Factory. I think I said everything I was gonna say here. I didn't have a script and I'm going without any sort of notes, so this was just off the top of my head. But this is a really cozy movie. I will definitely rewatch this one. Something about this movie just feels very cozy, and I related to these monster characters, and I related to just feeling like an outsider and all of that stuff. And I feel like that's the stuff that gets to shine in this new director's cut. So it's packed full of special features. It's an amazing release. Pick it up. But guys, I think we're done here. Stay weird. Remember to always be yourself, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.